Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak. I'd much rather be with you all in Milan, but I'm still happy we can connect this way. To help set some context for the presentation today, I'm going to review some US music sales and listening data for the first half of 2020. And I'll be discussing the ways COVID-19 has impacted the business in the US. Since I can't be there in person, if there are questions, please reach out to me via email, which is right here on the slide, jfriedlander@riaa.com. I'm always happy to talk data with anyone interested. 2020 has been a challenging year. Even with significant impact from COVID starting in the middle of March, recorded music revenues continued their recovery, up about 5.5% to $5.7 billion in the US in the first half of the year. Music's recovery has continued, but the growth rate is slower than recent years when we saw double-digit growth rates. Even with that increase, we know that a lot of the industry is still hurting. Venues are largely shut down, record stores can't open their doors, and many artists are having trouble making ends meet. Just as an example, U Street Music Hall here in DC, about 2 blocks away from my house, close enough to stumble home after a show, just a few weeks ago announced it was closing permanently. Thousands of venues across the country face risks of closing if live shows can't come back soon. We're trying to help however we can. Working with music industry partners, RIAA launched the Music COVID Relief website with information for artists and music professionals out of work to help show them how to receive benefits from the CARES Act and the Paycheck Protection Program. This also has links to find support from charities and other grants to help music creators. We're working to pass legislation to continue to provide assistance by prolonging those existing benefit programs and expanding them to more music professionals. And we're partnering with a new organization, the National Independent Venue Association, to help fight for new legislation called Save Our Stages, which would provide additional support to live music venues specifically. Our hope is that we can be most effective by partnering with the broader music community and speaking with one voice. Now let's talk a little bit more about the market data. I mentioned a recovery in music sales. If the growth seen in the first half continues, 2020 would be the 5th year of music's recovery in the US. But as you can see, there's still a long way to go compared to where the music business was at its peak. Adjusted for inflation, the industry is still only about half the size it was in 1999 during the height of the CD era. It had been over $22 billion. Again, that's at retail and adjusted for inflation. And then last year, 2019, it was $11.1 billion. Almost the entire recovery of the last 5 years has been driven by growth from streaming music, and predominantly from paid subscription services like Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Unlimited, and others. That's the category in purple here. This also shows revenues from ad-supported services like YouTube and Vivo. Those are in green. And digital and customized radio like Pandora and SiriusXM, which are in orange. Those all have grown, but not nearly as much as subscriptions. Overall, streaming revenues grew 12% in the first half of the year, which is about half the rate from the year before. With that, they're totaling a little less than $5 billion in the first half. Streaming growth is not just measured in dollars. Across all forms of streaming, there were a total of more than 750 billion, and that's with a B, songs streamed in the US in the first half of 2020. The scale continues to be staggering, and that figure is up about 10% compared to the previous year. Paid subscription audio continues to be the biggest and is gaining share, but all of these categories are each accounting for tens to hundreds of billions of streams annually. Streaming has led to an incredible transformation of the industry. Just 10 years ago, physical sales were still the biggest revenue generator for recorded music, but in a very short time, music has adapted and transformed to meet the needs of modern fans to the point where in the first half of this year, 85% of revenues came from streaming music. This is an area where music has really led the way compared with other traditional types of media and content. The chart here shows how much of the revenues of these types of media come from digital distribution. Amazingly, music gets an even higher percentage than video games, which are natively digital. Movies and TV, magazines, books, and newspapers are all continuing to increase their digital share, but none have evolved as quickly or as completely as music has. We see that fans love streaming music, and paid subscriptions were the biggest growth driver in the first half of 2020. Subscriptions alone were almost $4 billion. That's about 2/3 of all recorded music revenue in the US. This was driven by continued strong user growth. On the right, you can see the number of paid subscriptions kept growing to an average of more than 70 million for the first half of the year, increasing an average of about 1 million subscribers per month. We don't usually focus so much on the quarterly data, but we did see an impact from COVID-19 on subscriptions, as growth in Q1, when COVID-related lockdowns started, was actually faster than in Q2. Another area where we see a significant impact from COVID-19 is ad-supported revenues. This category includes services like YouTube, Vivo, Free Spotify, and some others. Revenues were up just 3% year over year, but there's a big difference between Q1 and Q2. In Q1, there were double-digit increases similar to the last few years. But in Q2, ad revenues for on-demand plays decreased. There was still growth in the number of streams, more than 100 billion based on data from services like MRC and Alpha Data in Q2. So we know that fans are still enjoying music there and going there for music access. But there was a broad decline in ad revenues for all types of media, not just for music. And that impacted what got paid out for artists and labels. They get paid much less for streams on these services than they do on paid subscriptions. In the US, there's one other major streaming category, and that's digital and customized radio. This includes revenues from internet radio services like Pandora and digital satellite radio revenues from SiriusXM. Remember, there's no public performance right for recorded music on broadcast radio in the United States. So these are the only performance rights that artists and record labels here receive. These revenues are generally paid based at statutory rates set by the government, so they tend to be more stable than for other formats, and they show less impact from COVID. This category was up 6% year over year for the first half of 2020, and that continues relatively steady growth over the last couple of years. One category that you won't see very much of in our revenue reports, but is certainly important, is music on social media. From consumer surveys, we know that music is one of the biggest reasons people use sites like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And if you look at the top 10 people or videos on each of those sites, you always see music taking up many, if not most, of the top spots. We've developed a website called Music Fuels, where we constantly track who the top artists are and who the top personalities are on those social media sites. As we've all been stuck at home, lots of us have started listening to music on new platforms like short-form video services, TikTok, Triller, and Instagram Reels, and live streaming concerts and artist shows on sites like Twitch. We're now starting to see data on those kinds of services. Just like the last wave of social media successes, we're again seeing that music plays a huge role in bringing fans to these sites. We worked with Music Watch on a survey and found that about 60% of users said dance and lip sync and cover songs were their favorite types of TikTok video. We also did an internal analysis of the top 50 most followed accounts on TikTok, and it showed 42 of them had music-focused videos. The biggest thing drawing people to apps like TikTok is music-related content. So streaming had lots of good news to deliver, but almost everything related to unit sales of music continues to be challenging in the United States. Digital downloads on services like iTunes were down 23% year over year. Both single track and whole album downloads continue to decline, and downloads are just a third of where they were 5 years ago. CDs didn't fare any better. Revenues from CDs were almost cut in half due to closures of stores and music venues. At just $130 million in the first half of 2020, CDs were only 2% of the market by value. This is another format where COVID-19 had a huge impact, and Q2 was much worse than Q1. There is one bright spot in physical music sales, and that's of course vinyl records. They really are an example of how incredible music fans are. Even with a Q2 slowdown and Record Store Day delayed until later in the year, vinyl sales still grew in the first half of the year. They only count for about a 4% share of the industry in the US, so they're pretty small, but they were bigger than CDs for the first time since 1986. I've got one last slide to share with you. So far, I've focused on the recorded music revenues, but of course the music industry is much more than that. Publishers and songwriters, live music, Musical instruments, music schools, music teachers, and many, many more are part of the music community. This all adds up to a much bigger impact on the economy as a whole. We developed a website called 50 States of Music to show the economic and cultural impact that music has. When you add all of these areas up, we see that music contributes more than $140 billion to the US economy annually, and it supports almost 2 million jobs. This helps show how powerful we can be when the music industry can speak as one voice. Thank you very much for your interest in this information. Again, I'm so sorry I can't be with you all in person. Of course, feel free to reach out to me by email, which I again have up on the screen, if you have any questions about this data. Thank you, and bye for now.